Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. We've already talked. I'm Harrison Stitt, one of the newer developers, sort of in the Imladris community. And Chris has asked me to help facilitate this one because he's out on a trip. Um, Tim, the guy we're about to hear from, is honestly one of my favorite people of all time. His impact in my community has been immeasurable, and the world he created with the Aetherlight is one that has captivated myself and many others that I'm close to. His creativity and his vision is truly a calling that he pursues with a keen attunement to the word and a passion for the younger generations that I have admired and been personally impacted by for almost a decade. Now that I'm sure I've put on the pressure, I think he'll tell his story and message better than I will. So without further ado, I present to you Tim Cleary.
How about that? That was an intro, mate. And I let me tell you something about the Aetherlighters. They're very anti-AI, so I know that you wrote that from your heart, not with any help from the enemy. No, whoa. Hey, hi everybody. As Harrison said, my name is Tim. As I have said, I have just woken up. Harrison messaged when he woke up an hour and a half earlier than he needed to at 4:30 a.m. his time, and I told him to go back to sleep. I also went back to sleep, and here we are. It's great to be here. I am dialing in from Auckland, New Zealand. It's a balmy Fahrenheit degrees. I don't know what temperature it is in Fahrenheit, is my honest spot there, but there is a little bit of sun poking through. I'm in my good room, which is like your American great rooms, but it's just good. It's a carport that we have turned into a room. It's got some outdoor furniture, a swinging chair, and some lights, and a small heater that you can't see above me, but it's keeping me alive. It is winter, Sean, here in balmy Auckland, New Zealand. I can tell you it's about 7 degrees Celsius. 39, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe.
What I remember it being.
Harrison, help me out.
I believe so. Yep.
Balmy. It's balmy Fahrenheit. You're exactly right, Jason. Anyway, look, I'm here to talk about story. I hope it's helpful. I feel, if I'm honest, like a little bit of a fraud in the game development community. I don't speak C++ or Java or Guava or any of the coding languages, including the one I just made up. But Guava would be a really cool coding language. I can't handle I can't even handle HTML. Sean, my man, we got some artists. It's very good. But what I do know is story. And I do know story, I think, because I'm a pastor first and foremost, and because I follow in the footsteps of one of the greatest storytellers, well, the greatest storyteller to ever walk the earth, and I'm formed and found within the greatest story that's ever been told. And so I guess this morning, and it's this afternoon for many of you, and if you're watching this online later, it could be the middle of the night because you don't sleep as a developer. You code and you eat Thai food, and sometimes you go outside, I guess. Harrison's like, you've just offended everybody, and I'm sorry. I don't like going outside either, except anyway. Let's just go.
Gonna have
We
to turn
tell
off my
bad.
camera if you keep making me laugh.
Sorry, mate. We tell bad stories. We don't tell good stories, and I think in this culture we find ourselves in, the people who tell the best stories are the ones who are going to win. And if you even look at cultural climates and the way things move, thank you, Fiona. I appreciate you. If you look at cultural climates and the way things move, you'll see that it's the people who know their why, who are living out of their story in the most authentic and real way, that control the conversation. And so we need to be people of better story, because I do think that the best story wins. There's this guy Ivan Illich who said if you want to change society, you have to tell an alternative story, and that became strangely some of the thinking behind the Aetherlight story. So this morning I'm going to get into some of the Aetherlight story, but not a whole lot. There are plenty of places you can hear the Aetherlight story, and I'm always here as part of Imladris to share that story, and you can find it online and all sorts. But I'll share part of that. But then I want to share some hopefully practical tools about how you can live out or code out or draw out or live out of and live the great story that we all belong to as believers. So I want to start with a question. We primed the chat before we started, so hopefully you can pop off in the chat here. But I want to start with a question. What was the last game you played that actually changed the way you saw the world? What was the last game you played that actually changed the way you saw the world? Yes, great, Donnie. Yeah, I kind of predicted that, Harrison. BioShock, yeah, cool. Yeah. Sorry, I am trying to be a little bit engaging here with the chat, people. I know some of you are probably working and just listening to this in the background. Respect. Lucian, that is a last name, mate. After this, Lucian, can you send me a private message just to explain how you pronounce that last name? It's fantastic. Good news is I do play games, just don't code them. Oh, you just go for it. Okay. Well, thank you, mate. That's good. Very good. Hey, the thing about any of those games is at no point did somebody sit down with you in the game and unpack their worldview. At no point did a character kind of Deadpool the screen and go, and that's why redemption matters. You know, do you know what I'm talking about when Deadpool just breaks the fourth wall? So often when we were creating the Aetherlight, we were like, man, it would be really easy if we just had somebody kind of turn to the player and explain this. And there were times when we actually had to create a player. Excuse me, it's balmy Fahrenheit here. That would help bridge some connections, but it was because we were being very careful about how we told the story. But nobody in any of these games hands you a tract and goes, and this is how it works. And you can find out more about this and your car's extended warranty by calling 0800 whatever. All these games, Breath of the Wild, Homeworld, they Final Fantasy VII, they shared an experience, right? They shared an experience of what it felt like to be lost and to be found. They shared an experience about what it cost to be brave and what cowardice cost as well. All of these games invited us into a story that actually became a shared memory or a shared experience with hundreds, thousands, millions of other players around the world. And that's how they connected us to story, connected us to something bigger than ourselves, and therefore connected to our hearts. And that, even at 2 a.m., when you've just realized something about the game that you've played for ages and just finally fallen in love with, is what makes a story great. Its ability to pry into our hearts and our minds and occupy the same space, essentially, as memory. And that's why stories matter to us as humans. They don't occupy the same space in our brains as information. Right, one of my favorite games, and don't cancel me for saying this, was a Far Cry game. And it was a Far Cry game set in rural Montana, maybe. And I just loved fishing. I just loved escaping into the environment and fishing and hunting. And I didn't care so much about the cult leader and what he was doing. But when I dealt with the cult leader, I was doing it because the world was worth saving, because the world and the experiences I'd had there weren't sheer or mere entertainment. They'd become a story, they'd become a world I was invested in and wanted to live out of. So I guess the thing that keeps me up at night. Sorry, I'm jumping in here. Yes, yes, yes. I love that. Totally. And Ray, we're going to get to that, I think, in just a minute. I'm hopeful. I've got some tools here that are going to be helpful with that. But the thing that keeps me up at night is, guys, we're heirs in the greatest story ever told. We are made to tell, retell, live, and relive the greatest story ever told. Because I think sometimes we have put the Bible on a shelf or on a bedside table, or dare I say it, holding a door open in the living room because it's nice and weighty. And it's become a theological document and stopped being literature. And so it started being this thing we refer to, or this thing we think about. But God didn't communicate through propositions, He communicates through story. And so when we take the book off the shelf or from behind the door and allow it to become alive again through its poetry, through its lament, through its parable, through its proverbs, through the characters who at no point are heroes, they're just like us, and realize that this story is far bigger than the stories we're telling. I mean, this story stretches from a garden to a garden city. It moves from exile to excitement and beyond. It moves from life to death, 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 almost infinity, until it gets to life, death, and resurrection. And then that pattern continues. This is a story that I think the devil's done a work, I'm about to sneeze again, in disrupting our wonder, in disrupting our love, in disrupting our connectivity with it. And so I've been that person. I am at times that person that has forgotten the inheritance that we have in the story of Scripture, that has produced work with great intent, and I would probably at the time have said produced art with great intent that ended up feeling like a sermon in a box. But I've been that person. I've made that mistake. And I want to say to you today that the best storyteller isn't the loudest in the room. It's not the most well thought out in the room. It's the person that loves the player. It's the person that loves the people they're trying to communicate to, and thereby puts the work in of intentionality and puts the work in of art to communicate to those people. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is true for us too, as game developers, as writers, as artists. So that was a really long intro. Harrison, I'm going to need your help, mate, because on my screens here, I have zero way of telling the time. So if you can just give me some jazz hands when I've, that would be very, very helpful. I
Easy. Did
also
you want
need
that
to,
a little bit earlier than
yeah, give
sort
me
of?
a 20-minute warning, please, mate.
Yeah,
Just
easy.
give me the double pump of the jazz hands, and please, it needs to get my attention and everybody else's. So when you do, I want you to really pop it, right? Get theatrical.
All right, easy. Cheers.
Thank you. The Aetherlight. I have spent years post-morteming the Aetherlight. And if you've ever been present in a post-mortem, it only gets worse as the thing decays. and I spent a lot of time trying to work out what went wrong, how it worked so well, but at the same time didn't have the legs to carry it to the end or to the finish line. It was years ago for me. It was 15 years ago for me. My son's 14. He was one of the first visitors to the original studio outside of staff as a baby. It was 15 years ago, and we set out to be connective tissue for young people. We came together, we were brought together by a group called the Postal Sunday School Mission or Movement. The Postal Sunday School Mission. And the Postal Sunday School was built for kids in rural communities, built for kids who were living on high stations in the Alps, the Southern Alps, Imladris, and other beautiful elven or Middle-earthian inspired places, and couldn't get to church. They couldn't get to a faith community. And so the Postal Sunday School movement used essentially like a Sears catalog, an ad in a Sears catalog. It wasn't called Sears, it was called Farmers here. And said, hey, do you want faith in your kids' life? Do you want your kids to be engaged in scripture but can't get them to church? We can help. We've got a thing called the Postal Sunday School movement. It took off. It was big. It was great. It worked for people in the high stations in the mountains, but it also worked for people in the suburbs. But the reality is that was almost 100 years ago now. It was 90 something years ago now when that started. And people don't play, or kids don't play anymore between the letterbox and the front door like they used to. They don't get excited when the postie comes. They're more excited about the emails that they receive or the Discord pings. They don't play where the post works anymore. And so we were put together to go, hey, we can do something here. We can create a tool that means that these digital natives who also for different reasons are isolated from faith communities potentially, or just don't feel the love and the weight and the beauty of scripture like we'd like them to, or like we'd like to, can discover it and come alive with it. And I think the concept was for us, for us was to take the narrative architecture of the Bible and build with that. So not the words, not the names, not the obvious iconography. I think the most obvious iconography we have is nails in terms of connective tissue between the two worlds. But the shape of the story, take the shape of the story and put it into this steampunk world. Dark, atmospheric. I got to be honest, I didn't want to do steampunk originally. That's scandal for the Aetherlight players. I wanted to do fantasy. I wanted to do high fantasy. Yeah, sorry, Harrison. But we settled on steampunk, and it became beautiful and was something very exciting. But this resistance movement fighting against a corrupt empire, it's like Star Wars with steam. It's how I got my name in game, Anakin Steamwalker. A rebel leader who sacrifices everything. And I guess a community of broken people who find each other in the ruins of this thing. And ironically, that's the story that's told in scripture, right? I used to say all the time, humanity tells its greatest stories in the dark, right? When was the stories of Exodus written or Genesis written? It was in these dark times. It was some of the greatest stories of high Israel were told in exile, right? Because it was in exile that the people of God were thinking back to all the ways God had liberated, saved, prepared, and loved, to then know that he had something more coming, that he was going to do more in the future. It's the same now for the Aetherlight. I thought this part of my story was over, right? I thought the Aetherlight was done. I thought I was done with the Aetherlight. And beautifully, right now we have a forum of, say, 60 young people who are telling their stories in the dark. The Aetherlight doesn't exist. It's not on a server, actively, publicly available anywhere for anybody. But yet there's these young people, 60 or so on a server, constantly remembering how good that experience was and essentially prophesying it into the future, which I just think is the cat's pajamas and beautiful. That's the power of story. But the temptation of the Aetherlight story for us was to make it super obvious. It was to label everything, and we did a little bit. You're right, with the companion engines, or the Resistance Academy companion engines, with the Postman. But if I'm honest, we didn't do that for the art. We did that for the parents. We did that for the parents who, probably like Harrison's, were a little bit nervous to let their kids play a video game, right? We would go to homeschool conventions. I would go to homeschool conventions dressed up like a nutter, and we would put on this beautiful experience for people. But the reality was, there's a lot of fear in these parents. There was a lot of fear in what their kids were stepping into. The online space was the Wild West, and so we had a lot of I guess, competing ideologies and thoughts from parents that we needed to help with. So we started to just label things as we could, but at no point does Lewis footnote Aslan, right? When you're reading Narnia, at no point does, I mean, Tolkien tells you what he's written is an allegory till he's blue in the face. The reality is, everything Tolkien wrote was allegory. And he'd be rolling in his grave that I said that. He'd also be rolling in his grave that I wear the One Ring as my wedding ring. But the reality is, it was all allegory, because it came out of a life that was so saturated with his faith that he couldn't escape it. And it was so implicit that he couldn't even acknowledge it. It's actually stunningly beautiful. So I guess with the Aetherlight, we gave ourselves permission to trust the story, just trust the framework. And in doing so, this story, told super honestly, gave or allowed players to get their meaning themselves. So rather than us trying to constantly unpack, what are we trying to say here? What are we trying to imply here? It allowed the players to together and individually reason and ration their way through, because the story was in the bones, was in the architecture of the game. And I think that's what I want us to all hear today is, as Christians in the game development space, our art doesn't have to be worn on our sleeves if it bleeds from our bones. And that's a bit graphic. But if it's in us, if it's innate in us, then we don't have to wear it on our sleeves as a badge to tell everybody what gang we belong to. It will leak out of every part of our story, out of our code, out of our art, out of our thought patterns. So I want to tell you about a spectrum this morning. And I don't know about you, but in New Zealand, everybody's talking about the spectrum. Where are you on the spectrum in terms of neurodiversity? But I'm definitely on the spectrum. But I want to talk to you about a different spectrum this morning. Hopefully it's a framework that you can take back to your studio, take back to your desk, take back to your wherever you are, and implement a little bit the thought process. On one end of the spectrum is pure propaganda, right? On one of the end of the spectrum is pure propaganda, and that's the content where the message is everything. The message is the medium. A story, if there is one, simply exists to be a vehicle for the points. The characters become nothing more than mouthpieces. The plot, just a mechanism for information, and the audience is there to be told something, not to experience anything. Right? That's pure propaganda. That exists on one side of this spectrum. And I think we've all, in some degrees, played that game or watched that film or read that letter or book. It's the equivalent of being talked at. It's the news, not the weather, right? On the other end of the spectrum is pure art, and we all romanticize pure art, but it's not to be romanticized. It's not bad. Neither's pure propaganda. It's not bad. It's just it's a tool. It's a way of doing it. Pure art is just there for the vibes, right? Pure art is like, you know what? I'm going to throw spaghetti at the roof and see if it sticks. Pure art is Jackson Pollock's Blue Poles. Why did he name it Blue Poles? Because there was some blue poles when he finished throwing paint at a wall. Right? Pure art has no explicit intent, no message. It's just craft and beauty and honest attempts at an artist rendering a human experience. Right? So those are the two sides of the spectrum. There's no demands of genre in pure art because there's no agenda attached. Both are valid creative concerns, valid creative choices. But there's a zone in the middle of the spectrum that I want us to see as Christian creatives. And that's what I call the zone of resonance. I think we need to be people of resonance, not propaganda, not pure art, but resonance. And I think that's where the greatest storytelling lives. It's where those stories that make the hairs on the back of your neck sit up are told. It's the stories that echo the great stories, the stories that invite you in, the stories that really excite in us this redemptive story or experience. Many of the games you guys mentioned in the start of this lecture, or whatever we're calling this, you mentioned them, and they are those games. They are those games that excite us, but they excite us because of their resonance. They have a worldview. They all have a worldview, and you can feel it in their design decisions and their narrative choices. And because it's a game, because they didn't announce that worldview, because they allowed you as a player to embody some of those choices, to feel some of those choices, they get inside us like most sermons can't do. They start to inhabit us. And this is what makes them dangerous and beautiful all at once. And this is why whoever tells the best story wins is important for us to realize, because if we're not inhabiting those narratives, if we're not telling those stories, if it's not leaking out of our bones, then somebody else is telling those stories. And for too long, Hollywood was infiltrated and allowed to tell stories that weren't helpful for the human condition or for human flourishing. We have a unique opportunity now, because I still think we're just now experiencing the true coming forward of the gaming community, and subculture is becoming a culture. We have the opportunity. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, what would change in your game if you removed every explicit faith reference? We asked ourselves this all the time. You know, if we removed some of the more obvious connectivity, would our story still matter? Would our narrative still hit different? Yeah, I need to keep going because I'm getting tight. The prodigal son. It's the most famous, I think, of Jesus' parables. The prodigal son's funny because we've misinterpreted it this whole time. Prodigal to us in our culture has started to mean the son that gets lost or runs away. That's not what prodigal means, just FYI. Prodigal means wasteful, the wasteful son. We don't tell the story like that. We don't hear the story told like that. But you know the story, younger son demands his inheritance early, essentially telling dad, I wish you were dead. Give me half of everything that's yours. And he squanders it, he wastes it, he ends up eating with pigs, partying hard, then eating with pigs, partying hard with pigs, then eating with pigs, and then eating what the pigs ate. And essentially, he returns home. We get one of the greatest visions of God ever told, of God hitching up his outfit and running. God runs to meet the son that was far off, the son that was infinitely wasteful, the son that took the inheritance that they'd been given by the Lord and wasted it, squandered it. And Jesus kind of talks about the Father running. He talks about the ring being put on the son's finger, the cloak being put around the son's shoulders, the fattened calf being killed, the older brother and his issue because he had all the presents but took it for granted of the Father. But he doesn't explain it. He doesn't say, and this is what God's love looks like. There's no altar call. There's no track. There's no handout. He just lets the story sit. He lets the story examine the audience. And 2,000 years, we've all come to these different readings of this story. I'm the wasteful son, or I'm the older brother, or finding ourselves in this story and finding something true that speaks to us all in this story because it wasn't given to us, it was allowed to be experienced by us, and we were allowed to, I guess, sit in the ambiguity. Jesus wasn't afraid of ambiguity. He wasn't afraid to let the story connect. He was not afraid of his audience not getting something. He trusted the story. He trusted the parables. He trusted them to do great work. And I think that's the standard that we need to be chasing as Christian creatives. I think the other thing to recognize is most of us here, I had the immense privilege of being part of a Christian studio. Now, I was part of a Christian studio. That did not mean that everybody in our studio was Christian. But many of us aren't in Christian studios. Many of us are sitting inside mainstream studios, or wishing that we sat inside mainstream studios. We're sitting in our living room or our garage or our bedroom, Harrison. And that's beautiful and it's amazing, but those spaces are going to be tough too. Between the daily stand-up and have I really only got 20 minutes left? That was fantastic, by the way. You belong in theatre. Somewhere between the stand-ups and the sprint reviews, it's hard to work out what it means to be faithfully present. And I want to give you 3 ways quickly to think about faithful presence. In a mainstream studio or in a community that's not of faith that you're a part of, whether it be a place where you're helping. Oh, there you go, Harrison. Moonlighting. I like that. I like that a lot. You've obviously been an occasional actor. You've been in 37 to 39 series of Criminal Minds. The first is the quiet craft. Right, the quiet craft. And this is allowing your faith to show up before your words do. This is allowing, I guess, as an animator, how you treat the things you get to draw, giving even inanimate line work dignity, right? Like having some respect, having some care for even these fictional beings. That's a theological expression, right? That's a theological conviction coming out just in your craft. You don't have to say it, just let it be clear. The designer who pushes back against the mechanic that feels unethical or feels just a bit ick. Hey, just checking. Is this necessary? And if it is, why? The writer who refuses to make the villain childish or cartoonish. It says, hey, we've got to make the villains real because our players are going to meet real villains. And if we don't make the villains real, we're not helping them out. If we dumb them down, if we Gify them or PGify them, we're not doing much help because the real villains of this story aren't like that. You don't have to announce any of this. You don't have to frame it in faith language. In fact, it's really, hurt people, eh, Sean? Totally agree. You don't have to couch this into a faith language. Just couch it in humanity. This has been my experience. How can we share this? We're also keepers of the story. So we're about the quiet craft, but we're also keepers of the story. And that's really the influence that you carry inside a creative team. Many of us won't be working alone or leading teams. We'll just be in the teams. And asking questions when you're not the lead writer, or asking questions when you're not the world builder of like, what does this say about the worth of people? What is this teaching us or our players about people's worth? Is this truly the character arc that we want this character on? Is this truly the character arc that this character would go on? I could go on a massive tangent right here about Enneagram and all those things, but I won't. Are we respecting our players here? Are we respecting their intelligence, or are we phoning it in? Those questions aren't religious questions; they're human questions, but they allow us to speak into what is a profound place of influence, and allow us to just gently be keepers of this great story. The third thing here is, if you're working in a mainstream studio, I say this with absolute love, you're in enemy territory. You're in enemy territory. But you can't think that way. Yes, the devil wants to distract and manipulate and own our stories and our worldviews. But every person you worked with is so deeply loved by God. Every person you're creating for is so deeply loved by God. And so whilst the territory belongs to the enemy, the people in the territory don't. And whilst you want to so badly be a missionary in that space, in the truest sense of the word, sometimes that gets messy because of the posture that expects you to carry. I've carried it, and it will exhaust you. It will make you anxious and guarded and take away some of the very humanity that you want to share, some of the very best parts of your creativity and character that you want to share. You're a craftsperson first. You're a collaborator first. You're a human being like them who knows the true reason why story matters. And if you can lead with that, then you'll lead unguarded. You'll speak and you'll respond unguarded. And you won't feel that anxiety anymore because you're living your truth for people who need your truth, because they're people who need to feel that love. But that's a long game. That won't happen in moments. It will happen over a much longer period of time. And you'll get these opportunities when a colleague comes to you at the end of their rope, at the end of themselves, and, hey, why do you seem to have it together? Why are you such a non-anxious presence in the studio when we're eating Thai food, we're doing a sprint, we're right up against it, we're forgetting to put on deodorant? Why are you not? Why have you got it together? They won't come to you with that question after a month or 3. They'll come to you with that question after 3 or 4 years, because they've seen you in season and out. Why do you smell so good, Jason? It's important and it's beautiful. The long game's the only game worth playing. Please, 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 if I can encourage you, if any of you are feeling at the end of your rope in one of these spaces, can I encourage you? Dig in. Dig in. One of my favorite stories, and this is totally off my notes, and I may miss a whole half of this lecture at this point. One of my favorite stories is of the Israelites, and they're in strife, and they pray, and the prophet says, "Hey, dig ditches, dig these ditches, and watch what I do. Watch what I do." And Scripture is really clear. It says, after the grain offering, water flowed from the wasteland and filled the ditches. it didn't flow from the promised land. It didn't flow from beautiful, pure aquifers beneath the ground they were on. It flowed out of the wasteland they'd been lost in. And I think sometimes we forget that we can dig ditches in hard seasons and see the water fill them in the redemptive moments, in the culminations. And so that's pretty cool. Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. Yeah, so true. Very cool. Shoot the cat. Here we go. Just some practical tools. I don't, sorry for all you cat lovers. I don't actually mean shoot the cat. I just mean I just looked at my clock and now I have even less time than Jazz Hands told me. Number one, like, how can you make your mechanics preach? There's a question we were constantly asking ourselves in the Aetherlight. How can we make our mechanics preach? Our mechanics are going to preach louder than our dialogue. In fact, our dialogue is not even just second. It's not secondary or tertiary. Our mechanics have to do the work. A character can say that redemption's possible, but it's so much better if a character shows that redemption's possible. Spoilers, we've got a few of those in the Aetherlight. What does your game system say about how the world works? Asking ourselves these questions in the beginning and constantly throughout the development process is going to be really helpful for us. What does this say about failure? What is this implicitly and explicitly saying about failure, about grace, about effort, and why those things matter? And so if mechanics become our preachers rather than our dialogue, then our characters become confession. I think we need to create characters that look a lot more like us and a lot less like idealism. And I think we're seeing this we've seen this over the last few years in literature. I love the work of Stephen Donaldson. He had a white gold wielding leper as his hero, but he was much more an anti-hero because he was much more just like us as humans. Most of our characters, if they're honest, carry much of our confession as creators. Not their biography, but their struggles. The things that we as creators haven't fully resolved in our minds, in our hearts. And that's not a writer displaying a weakness, that's a writer being honest. It's a writer using their own lives, their most authentic, truest experience of life as their source material. And it's going to help us create more three-dimensional, four-dimensional characters. It's the thing that makes a character feel real and not constructed. It's the character that can't forgive themselves. It's the character that can't love themselves. It's the leader that is constantly afraid that they are not enough. I'm that leader, if I'm honest. And so it comes out in the characters that I write. It comes out in the stories I tell. It doesn't make them dangerously vulnerable. It makes them beautiful and connectable for our people. Let the player discover. I think we've got to carry a lot of trust. I think, as I said to you before, Jesus didn't unpack his parables all the time. Often he left it open to the reader or the listener's comprehension of the experience or the story. We need to be more like that in our stories. We need to be more like that in our storytelling. We need to give trust. We need to give moments of discovery to our players because, excuse me, it's getting colder, not warmer, even though the sun is there. Because when a player discovers something on their own, it's so much more powerful than when we drip feed it or we hand it to them on a silver plate. We can't rob the player of experiencing things by explaining them first. We need to put truth into our worlds. We need to design space for discovery. And then we need to kind of get out of the way of the whole experience. I think sometimes we fill space with exposition. We fill space with explanation that actually can just be allowed to sit. And it can be allowed to sit because I think my fourth thing to say is that we need to utilize silence. Our games are very full these days. They're full of lights and sounds. And how can we utilize silence? Not every question in your game world needs an answer. There's a moment of discovery, but that discovery can be followed up with silence, and that becomes mystery. When the discovery is followed up with silence, or when silence preempts the discovery, those are the backbone or the makings of mystery. And it's the unanswered questions more than anything else that I think keeps the player playing your game long after they've turned off their device. That's what we want, because we want to build communities. We want to build thought patterns that are not of this world. And that happens when we allow the questions to follow us into the real world. I would argue that's not a failure of design, that's a maturity. It's a maturity. Jesus does this constantly. Faith is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's not. It isn't. It's like a. And he doesn't explain how it's like a. He allows us to get inside the metaphor. He leaves room for. He leaves room for. This is why I shouldn't go off my notes. He leaves room for mystery. He leaves room for mystery. And that the word like is that room. It's that placeholder. It's that thing that holds the door of mystery ajar. That's 10. It's 10, Harrison. We're wrapping this up. Finally, guys, you got permission. You got permission. You don't have to preach. You don't have to you don't have to be an evangelist in your video games or in your art or in your story. You don't need a salvation arc to make what you're doing, what you're creating worthwhile. I love Jonathan. I love Andrew Peterson. He's a great friend. It all became a great friend while I was in Franklin. I think sometimes the pressure to preach is the thing that kills the story. Please, please, please don't feel like you have to be preachers. I'm a game developer that's become a preacher. Don't cut my lunch. Don't try to do everything. Be a great game developer. Make great art, to quote Neil Gaiman, who unfortunately has been cancelled recently. But doesn't make what he said any less true. Make great art. The pressure to preach is the thing that kills our stories. And a dead story can't be the best story. And so feel permission not to preach. Feel permission not to allegorize. Feel permission not to be anything other than a person soaked in the scriptures and the word of God creating something, because it will get out. C.S. Lewis didn't need footnotes to explain his stories. Tolkien could talk about it not being an allegory till it was blue in the face, but it leaked out of who he was. I don't think Martin Luther said that, but that's okay. Make something beautiful. Make something beautiful. That's an act of worship. That's an act of worship. Make something true. That's an act of witness. And so we can be those people. We can be those people. The best storytellers win, not because they're the most explicit, not because they're the most obvious, not because they're the safest, but because they're the most honest. Let's make honest art. Let's live in the space of resonance, not propaganda, not pure art, but resonance. Resonance with the greatest story, because our lives resonate with the greatest story. I'm going to call it there, if that's cool. I just really want to have some time for questions, Harrison. I'm sorry there was no altar call there for you guys. There's no clean close there, but I feel like I've tried to ram in in a little bit too much, and you've been a very generous audience, mainly because you can't talk back.
which is about to change. If you could all see at the bottom of your screen, I'm not sure how many people have done this before, but there's a little hand icon. If you'd like to ask your questions verbally, you can press that one. I'll flick you up onto the stage and you can have a spoken one. Otherwise, feel free to chuck any questions in the text chat, and we have about 7 minutes to sort of go over that. All right, so Sean's asking, even without preachy storytelling, was there ever a time where prayer and fasting became a necessary part of overcoming writer's block in developing your stories, connecting with the heart of God to answer your shortcomings of ideas?
Yeah, look, great question, Sean. I'm a pastor, a leader of faith community, and so prayer and fasting is part of my rhythms as it stands. And especially prayer was part of our rhythms constantly as a studio. And so, even though we had a bunch of non believers in the studio, we would still stop for prayer every morning. We would still make space for that. Absolutely. I think you come up against times of intense writer's block. And I would add prayer, fasting, and movement. Because often I think part of our biggest writer's blocks come from being stationary. And so I would often go on prayer walks. I'd get out, I'd move my body to help move my mind. I'd start thinking, praying, dreaming around the issue. My son's middle name is Sparrow, Joel Timothy Sparrow Cleary. Don't look him up; he's not online. And and we named him Sparrow not because we wanted him to sound a little bit like Jack Sparrow, because Pirates of the Caribbean was big 14 years ago, but because we wanted him to know that there was no problem that he could look at that he couldn't fly above or around and see that what looked like a mile high wall was an inch less than an inch thick. And so um, I would say that, yeah, get moving. Oh, there you go. You've agreed. So yeah, get moving as well as praying and fasting. There you go. Oh, Jason, I've heard that you're into birds. Very good. Is it you who's into birds? Somebody said to us, get Jason to do some
That's
birds
that's
in
the
the
one.
Aetherlight. It is, yeah.
All right. I've got a question. How did you find the right kinds of questions to be asking? You've mentioned asking things like, "How can we preach with our mechanics more than our characters?" And as a former player of Aetherlight, I definitely saw that you used sort of the Aether meter as a means of sort of presenting the Holy Spirit. How did you land on those questions? I wouldn't have come to even the beginnings of the idea of like telling a story through the mechanics more than the characters.
Two things. One, I'd say a lot of argument. We were very good at arguing. We were very good at robust debate, we'd call it, or robust discussion.
I think that was
But
shared by the
two,
community as well.
yeah, but two, I think it was my mate Frank of Assisi who said, "Preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words." I think that's massive. I think that's massive, and so um, we were constantly asking ourselves, or I'm constantly asking myself, even to this day, how can I do this without? I'm good at talking. I'm good at talking. How can I do this without talking? How can I operate out of a different kind of strength that doesn't come from my natural giftings and abilities all the time, but comes from a grace that God's gifted and put on me. Yeah. Hope that's helpful. You had extra time to think about your questions this morning, didn't you, Harrison?
Oh, absolutely. Lifesaver. I only had two last night.
And art, Sean. You're gifted at typing and art.
All right, we got a question from Fiona,
Hi, Fiona.
invited to the stage. You should theoretically have a pop up on screen that lets you open up the stage for you.
I think Fiona's typing it now.
Theoretically. There we are.
Oh, Fiona, that's an unfair question. Look, I'll give you the basic answer. Where did the Aetherlight go wrong? We kept developing for 40,000 players when we probably needed 200,000, and so we should have marketed far more than we developed early on. Is the easiest and most explicit answer for you. And Sean's right. That's where it went wrong from a that's the front foot of where it went wrong. The reality is, would we have had, if we didn't do 3 episodes and we only did 1, and we didn't do the full feature set, but we grew our community, or we grew our not our community, but grew our eyeballs earlier and greater, would we have the community we have today? I don't know the answer. That's why it's so hard. Hindsight's so messy like that. We could have gone hard out with the marketing and created a large top of the funnel, and never created that core that I think, in all honesty, and if please don't take this back to the Aetherlight fan Discord server, but I think it's our community that will save our game. Now, I think the resistance has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The resistance will save the resistance. The resistance will save Athasia. With or without me. With or without these resistance leaders that it's had for 14 years that have struggled to believe that it was worth it time and time again. So that's where it went wrong explicitly, but not where it went wrong implicitly. I think it went right implicitly. I think God did what God needed to do. I think, was the world not ready? Were we not ready? There's so many questions. I'm wrestling with them constantly.
I definitely agree that the community is going to play a part, and we have reached 7 o'clock, folks. So thank you all for popping in. You're welcome to stick around. I'm not sure if
Thanks, buddy.
Tim has anything ahead. I've got a little bit, so I could potentially share on something if we didn't have any more questions. But I have a bit of a testimony that that can kind of speak to what Tim's just said about the community saving the game that made it. Just give a couple more seconds for any other questions first.
It's a pleasure, Misty and Jonathan, and I agree, Fiona. Donnie, yeah, thank you. As I said a minute ago, Jason's
Conditions
question
above.
above.
Oh, whoops. Thanks, Jess. Tim, how can you represent the power and sovereignty of God in a game without the mechanics becoming if A, then B, which isn't really how God operates all the time?
Thanks, Jason. This was a great lecture until you put me on the spot with a hard question I can't answer. Look, mate, I'd straight up say, we've got to be super careful we don't build Babel. And so I would say the only way to represent the power and sovereignty of God is to let the power and sovereignty of God represent itself. Super tough. It's super tough to do. I can't tell you. I can't answer that question outside of maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we. Yeah, there are just some things we can't emulate. That's my first read. That's without the robust discussion and debate I talked about in the studio. And so, can you ask that question? Can we connect on that question again in a month? Because I think it's a really great question, but I think we can't answer it easily. Yeah. Yeah, Sean, come on, man. I love that. I love that. My daughter is she just turned 8 and she got her very first Bible, and she last night she's just reading through bit by bit. Oh, Dad, Cain and Abel, the brother murdered his brother. And it's been beautiful to watch the story come alive for one of my own kids. Um, on her own, I could tell that story, but she's experienced that story through reading scripture herself. I hope that that's what the Etherlight does for your daughter, Sean. That she'll play it, and parts of scripture, like her biblical imagination, will be excited and unleashed.
All right, we got a question from Lucian. Hey Tim, I'm working on a piece of script for a game, Christian, which does that. Preaches without preaching directly, but goes through experiences. Would you be interested in having a look at at least the first act?
Yeah, of course, man. Absolutely. I don't have a lot of time, but send something through, and I'll be super honest with you. Um, yeah, I'll be super honest with you about when I can get back to you, and I'll make sure to yeah, I won't leave you on red, if that makes sense. Uh,
On the topic of Sean's question from before, sorry, Jason's question from before, about not like letting God's sovereignty speak through a game without the mechanics becoming if A then B. Um, one of my thoughts is God is able to do work as well. We are, for the most part, sort of the hands and feet of him in the industry, but he also does have the capacity to do things with our game that we never expected, um,
sure.
and sort of take it into his own hands in a way. As soon as it's no longer directly under human control, who knows what could happen with it. Um, he's a all-powerful God. He can do whatever he wants. So there is perfectly the opportunity for you just to follow in what you feel. Sorry, pardon me. God is sort of calling you towards, and let him work out his plan through it, in a way that he sees fit.
Yeah, and I'd argue that's what happened with the Etherlight. Where the Etherlight got wrong, it didn't. In a lot of ways,
All right.
God was doing something. Uh,
Another question
Fiona,
from Jason.
I totally agree. Um, yeah, I think that's very true. Uh,
All right, another
yeah,
question
Jason,
from Jason. How can we be involved and help bring the Eighth Light back?
I'm so glad you asked. Look, two things. One of the things that's blown my mind is with Imladris, we have a community of people who can really, yeah, get amongst and volunteer time and ability, and to make Athasia a world worth saving again. And if I had time, I'd talk about that, because I think that was, it's my sixth point. I didn't get to it, but we've got to build worlds worth saving, because ours is so worth saving, and that's how you emulate. And actually, it might be how we deal with the sovereignty of God factor a little bit as well. But look, help, yeah, volunteer time and effort, and Chris obviously is leading that charge. I'm still heavily involved, but more on the narrative side, and on the theology side, and essentially a little bit of chaplaincy for this community. But what I would say is, right now the need is funding, and so what we've been doing is, we need to get this in front of, well, no, we don't need to get this in front of people who can help resource it. We need to get Harrison and his friends. So just now, I mean, these guys are so passionate, and I have screens and screens of screens now of testimonials of how this game literally changed the life and was foundational in the worldview creation of 60 plus young people. And so we need to get that out into the world. It's told us beautifully where the best marketing we did was, what the best tools were, what the best companion pieces were, and so we need to get all that information into the hands of the people with the resources. God doesn't have a money problem. He doesn't have a resource problem. We have an obedience problem. We have a listening problem. we have a dissemination of information problem. And so all of those things you can help with primarily right now, while we get the game, the Unity, everything kind of back up to scratch, and get the game in a minimal, lovable product type setup, so that we can get it in front of players and professionals alike. The best thing you can do is be praying, and I don't say that lightly. I think prayer is the oil of any great engine. Oh, Harrison, you like that? Jazz hands right there.
Incredible.
Guys, I have to go. Thank you so much for your time. I live on this server as Methandria. If you need anything, you can find me here. I have so much time and love for this community. I actually serve on the Imladris Council as well. And so anything you need, I'm here and would love to continue to connect. Harrison, yes, please. If though I have to go, you can continue, mate. I hand you the floor. And hey, love you all very, very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the time. Your busy lives, important jobs, but you've made the time, and I'm very, very grateful. Thanks, Chris. If you ever watch this, mate, I also love you deeply. Looking forward to hanging out soon. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thanks so much, guys. See you later.
Thank you, Tim. All right. Oh, that's scary. Now I'm the only one up here. All right. Um, yeah, that testimony. So the community has not faded. Is one of the things I'd say. Um, through I've been personally calling it the fall. The post-fall period after the forums went down, which was our primary community space, and the Aetherlight itself, which was the game we loved. We kind of all migrated onto Discord, where some people already had contact, and others filtered in through different routes. One of which came from like one of which has come from like recently. I found someone on Reddit who was a beta tester in the original game, and they're now on that server with us all. And it was in January of this year that I was talking with a lot of our community about the idea of trying to get the intellectual property, the rights to the game, the rights to the story itself, and sort of bring that back to fruition, and how we'd go about that, like purchasing it from whoever was the current holder of it. And there was just a real buzz about the idea of the Aetherlight coming back. And at this time, we actually had no idea that this was on its way, or that the prospect of the Aetherlight was at all possible. It was like Tim was experiencing. We were all very much in the experience of like, oh, now we've got to move on with our lives. This was a chapter that was great, but it's now over. But for just this short period of time, 3 or 4 weeks, there was just a massive influx of activity on this server that had been quiet for quite a while. And because of that, I go digging, and I go to the Scarlet City Studios website, and I find on there a phone number listed, and I'm like, it couldn't hurt to give it a call. It was 11 o'clock at night for me, and I went, I'm sure this will just ring out in an office somewhere, and no one will ever hear it. And so I call the phone number, and I give a little spiel. Hi, I'm Harrison Steele. I was part of a game. This phone number was listed on a website, blah blah blah. What I wasn't expecting was the following day to get a text from a man named Wayne Shkesh, I believe is how you would pronounce his surname. He was the board director of Scarlet City Studios, the game studio that made the Aetherlight. I had called his private phone number at 2 a.m. for his time, which is probably why I'll never call a random phone number late at night again. And he gets in contact with me and he goes, "Hey, yeah, I'd actually love to have a chat with you about this game. I'd be keen to talk to you and tell you about what's kind of going on at the moment." A couple days later, we've managed to organize this phone call, and I hop on the call with him, and he says, "We're actually in the middle of transferring the IP over to someone who's going to bring the game back," and my jaw dropped. because I felt there was no other word than providence to describe what God had done with bringing back a community that had been silent for a very long time. Um, we had kept up contact for the longest period we possibly could, but at some point we do grow up and we do grow apart. And abruptly, all of us were brought back to the same place with the same. I've really been missing the Aetherlight. Several people dreamt about it, I believe, and I don't have any other word for it than providence. The fact that this community that was so ready to jump back on board suddenly lit back up with activity just weeks before um, the current custodians of the intellectual property had it transferred over to them. And through Wayne, I was put back in contact with Tim, who I'd spoken to briefly earlier on, and just this entire team. And I have been blown away by the way that the community is just lit back up recently. If you did want to check that out, it is linked over in the Aetherlight forum page. You're welcome to join. Um, but yeah, that's sort of the testimony I have. The fact that out of nowhere and at the right time, the community was ready again. And I believe that's a powerful piece of evidence that God is working through this game. Sorry to drag it out, folks, but oh, definitely. Definitely, Jess. Fabulous. Well, again, thank you all for tuning in. I know I definitely enjoyed that. I have over 100 lines of notes in my notepad now. Um, thank you all very much. And I don't know how to wrap it up, so I'll just say bye. Lovely to meet you all.